Welcome everyone to this system mapping session, an introduction into visualizing complex systems for food and agricultural commodity systems. It's such a pleasure to be hosting this session today on behalf of the Green Commodities program and the Green Commodities community. My name is Sole Riestra. I'm the Training and Learning Advisor for Effective Collaborative Action. And if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to set up a little bit of the context on why we are offering and running these sessions. And as you know, the next 90 minutes are meant to be a practical session on systems mapping as a process to deepen our understanding of the systems we work with and bring about more effective collaborative action. So this session will be facilitated by the founders of System Mapping Academy, Gian Wake and Fabian Gam. System Mapping Academy has been collaborating with FACS on several projects in Paraguay and Peru, and they bring their expertise on system mapping applied to food and agricultural commodity systems in the context of the work that we do at FACS and UNDP more broadly. So before passing the mic to them, I wanted to share a bit of a context as to why this masterclass is being offered. As part of the efforts to build capacity on deep collaboration, we at GCP and FACS have been launching the Guide to Effective Collaborative Action, which was built upon 10 years of experience supporting multi-stakeholder collaboration and systems change within national commodity platforms at a global level. And we talk about effective collaborative action as a type of collaboration that goes beyond a theoretical exercise or a conceptual ideation, and rather it focuses on the need to bring about systems change into food systems in a much more effective way, and that we need to do so together, and action is needed urgently. If we go to the next slide, please. Many of you are probably already familiar with effective collaborative actions components. The methodology has 4 building blocks, and we also have 3 additional elements, stakeholder actions and backbone support, as well as the 4 essential practices, which are build systems, leadership capacity, work with power, work through conflict, and effective communication. All of these were introduced through the ECA discovery sessions. If you haven't managed to join one discovery session yet, stay tuned and sign up to the next session to learn more about this methodology, because we are offering these sessions on a regular basis through the Green Commodities community. Or if you need a session to be run for a specific audience, feel free to contact us. Systems mapping is a foundational tool to build collaborative efforts, particularly within complex projects with multiple stakeholders. And it is a tool that touches upon all of the components of the methodology in one way or another, but it does relate more closely to the building block of understanding the system and the essential practice on building systems leadership capacity, as the slide is showing. Systems mapping can also help us take a step back and listen to the perspectives of various stakeholders, visualize the complexity, and this can be a great approach to uncovering new interconnections, relationships, and potential for change, as well as building trust, which is the theme of this month and the next one. And it can also help unveil sources of power struggles and conflict, and where the key needs are for communication to be effective. So it kind of touches upon all of the essential practices. In a nutshell, the systems mapping method helps stakeholders build a shared understanding of the current system and supports the identification of new opportunities for effective collaborative action. But I'm going to let Fabian and Gian actually do justice to systems mapping much better than what I can. And I'm going to pass on the mic and the floor to them to start this masterclass session. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And don't hesitate to use the chat box to share any questions or comments throughout the session. Over to you, Gian and Fabian. Thank you.
Hello, thank you also from our side. We're really happy to be here and to share with you a bit our knowledge and experience with you also system mapping firsthand today. And yeah, so shortly about us. So as Maria also introduced already, so we're working in the field of system innovation and system mapping. And our focus is mostly on capacity building and bringing people into this world of system thinking to understand systems a bit better and to get the tools to navigate this complexity. And we're doing this with trainings and masterclasses like this, but also offering project support like we did in Peru, which you also will see today much more of. So the case study of the project in Peru. And we also developing learning materials in that sense. And this is also what you get to experience today. We developed a kind of a toolkit which supports you in mapping your own systems digitally. And yeah, so what we just wanted to share is a bit about our background and how we came about system mapping. So basically, I'm coming from the field of design and was always wondering where the design and the system mindsets can fit together, because I think that design is really focused on people and system is really focused on systems. And it's kind of, I always was interested in how they are getting together to use the potential of both of them. And so Gian and I got together a couple of years ago to explore this field of system and design. And yeah, we discovered then system mapping as a tool which really helps bring together these worlds and which is also a good entry point into the system thinking world. And yeah, so we specialized in this. And today we run these trainings and projects in that field. And yeah, so I'm coming from design and innovation. So I did a lot of workshops and also learning development in the last 10 years, mostly at the moment also focusing on social entrepreneurship here in Berlin, but also on international development sectors. Maybe Gian, do you also want to give a short introduction about yourself?
Yes, I would love to. Thanks, Fabian. Thanks, Sole. And also, yes, welcome from my side. Great to see so many familiar faces here. Exactly. My name is Gian. I'm a systems modeler by training. And yeah, since worked in many different projects, mostly about understanding the complexity of systems by visualizing them, partly also by developing mathematical simulation models. And I think it's fascinating with kind of the systems field that we can combine this analytical power and data and processes, but also this participatory way of talking, of interacting, of engaging stakeholders. That's what really fascinating me, and also that it's applicable to so many different areas. So not just working on sustainable agriculture, but also urban development, worked on green hydrogen, on innovation systems. So very, very interesting fields. And exactly, just as Fabian said, at some point I was also thinking a little bit, system thinking is sometimes very technical, very scientific, a little bit elitist even. And yeah, we set our goal to make it a little bit more approachable, a little bit easier to step in. Of course, it's still a learning path to master, but it shouldn't be difficult to start with. And yeah, so we're really happy to welcome you to this introductory session to system mapping.
Great. Thank you, Gian, for introducing you. So it's if you speak about systems and about system mapping, system thinking, it's always quite vague in the beginning. So it's not really clear what is this all about and how does this actually look like. And what we want to show you today is also later on a more in-depth case study on how this actually is implemented also with the project with the UNDP, where we were questioning how we can foster sustainable commodities and protect forests in Peru. So this is one of many challenges we work on with this methodology. But as I said, later on, you will get more information about this. So now we talked a lot about ourselves already, but we are also still curious. Also, if we only share the 1.5 hours the next, but it's super interesting for us to see who is in the room and also to get an idea of what comes into your mind when you hear the term system mapping, because it's can be various things. And so we want to encourage you to give us these answers. I will just shortly post a link in the chat where we have this both questions, and would kindly ask you to answer them shortly, and then we will get a bit of a feeling who is in the room and what are you also expecting and thinking about the topic of system mapping. So basically you just should see a small field where you can enter the answers. There are already answers coming in. Great. Cool. Yeah, we already heard this in the beginning a bit. So it's quite, but it's still super diverse from New York to Buenos Aires to UK. We are basically, Gian and I are based in Berlin here. And so we have a really great and diverse group. I think also when Gian and I always talk about this, and when we are thinking back 3-4 years, it's really incredible that we now have this possibility to have such a diverse group from all over the world, learning about this connectedness also, which is basically which we are now doing. So it's a really nice occasion. Pacific Northwest, Singapore even, crazy, nice. Yeah, so it might be really late there. Yeah, we already heard this. Thank you. So the next question was about what comes to your mind when you hear the term system mapping. And this is always interesting for us because we realized that the term system is so manifold in the world, and so it's really interesting to see your focus on that. Make sense of complexity. That's actually the I would say the overall goal, to kind of get an idea of what is out there, how is it working, and relationships are one key part, which we also today will touch upon. Understanding how to act. Yes, so it's basically we're trying to understand the system in order to take more informed decisions in the end. Break paradigms. That's we'll also come to that.
I also see 4-dimensional chess. I'm tempted to ask. That's the first time I hear the comparison.
That was me. It's when you just think you've got it sorted, all of a sudden another dimension pops up.
Yeah, that's really describes it well. Great. Yeah, interconnectedness, identifying components. Actually, that's what we do in a couple of minutes. Holistic. Yeah. Thank you very much. So I think this already gives some kind of idea what is in your mind when you hear this term, but also what we will now work on the next 1 hour. Thank you for sharing this with us. So going back to the presentation. So the agenda for today is about, so basically giving an introduction into system thinking, but also then into system mapping, because we are thinking that it's always good to have this part of system thinking, which is a much broader term, because system mapping is closely linked to it and part of it. Then we also will have some time for questions and exercise afterwards. So I will now give you a short introduction into system thinking and what this entails. And it's really a short introduction, so this would be underlined because we are not, of course, we can't cover all of these topics in this short amount of time. But so just things which we think it's really important for you to know before system mapping, before start system mapping. So as also the OECD already realized with this quote from Jose Angel Riera, unless we adopt a systems approach, unless we employ system thinking, we will fail to understand the world we're living in. And I think also, especially thinking about the last years with the pandemic, we just see how much everything is connected and gets much more tangible in which complexity we are living in. And this gives also another push to the system thinking approach and also to system mapping, because we're realizing in order to find solutions and improve systems in that complexity, we need to have a bit of overview and understanding of what are the dynamics in there. So system thinking is basically, it's pretty old, so it's already developed in the 60s, and there was a lot of a big movement, but somehow it never came to its full flourishing. And yeah, from our perspective, this is now kind of the second renaissance, if you want, of system thinking, as we are now really see the urge to do this. So system thinking, in a definition, is a set of principles, methods, and tools to understand complexity in a way, to achieve a desired purpose. So there's always kind of a goal we want to have. Maybe it's understanding, maybe it's alleviating reforestation. So there, you name it, there are a lot of possible topics. And this approach should help us to understand this complexity in order to take more informed decisions, create innovative ideas, and change the system for the better. So we have two parts of system thinking where we think they are really important, especially also for system mapping. And it's, like I said, it's just a short introduction. There are also plenty of other things to it. And one is that system thinking gives us a deeper understanding of the system. So maybe you know already the term of the system of the iceberg. It's used also in different kinds of other fields. And there's the idea of we experience events, but they have different reasons for what they are, why they are existing. And so, for example, system thinking can help us to ask why and get deeper towards mental models, for example. So as an example, so if you will catch a cold, for example, this is just an event. So I'm catching a cold and then I get medicine and it gets better. But system thinking tries to ask more questions, to get deeper. So what are the trends in that sense? What are the patterns behind this? So maybe you weren't sleeping enough or catching more colds in the last year. But also from there, you can go deeper to see the underlying structure. So what has influenced these patterns? So maybe you had stress at work or were not eating well. And then the question arises, why is this structure like it is? And then we come to the mental models where it's all about the assumptions and beliefs. And there it's maybe that career is really important and a piece of identity, or the healthy food is too expensive. And if we see under system thinking as kind of this tool to bring us down this this iceberg to really understand the mental models, which also have the most leverage in it. So if we would change the mental models, we can ultimately change the events at its core, like at its root cause, basically. So system understanding is about these causal structures to explain what happened, and also to see the interconnectedness between these mental models, patterns, underlying structures, and events. The second thing, which we think, and also Maria already mentioned it, is the cooperation between stakeholders, where system thinking has basically at its core, because only if we bring together different perspectives, we can really understand a system and how it works. And so it's all about trying to break these mental models, also with stakeholders, getting a bird's eye perspective, and developing a shared understanding and trust. So basically, if you imagine here this metaphor of an elephant, and these people are they are blindfolded, they don't see the elephant, they just touch it, and so every one of them gets a different idea of what is an elephant. So how does it look like, how does it feel like? So maybe one says, okay, it's a spear, or it's a wall, or it's a rope. And I think that's really gives a good sense. So only if people are really communicating, they can understand what an elephant is really about and how it looks like and maybe how it behaves. And that's a really significant metaphor for what system thinking can do. And what we also think where the most power lies into. So getting a common understanding of a system and then jointly getting to action to improve it to the better. So this was just a short introduction into system thinking, like that you just see in which world we are, in which realm we are working. And yeah, but today it's about system mapping, so about the visualizing of the complexity. And for that, I will hand over to Xian.
Thank you, Fabian. Then I will take over the screen sharing. There it is. So now you should be able to see my screen. Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, Fabian, for the introduction. And exactly, so when we think about system thinking, we want to, for me it says still loading.
Yes, Jan, it's still loading.
Okay,
Yeah,
then give me a second. Let me just.
Oh, there it is.
Again.
It is.
It's showing now.
Great, but does it also show full screen?
Not yet, still loading.
Okay, let me just quickly reload the page. This might be something with the Google Doc. Sorry for the short interruption.
Otherwise, I can also take it over and lead through.
That's true. It seems to be something on my side, I'm afraid. Yeah, if that's working for you, Fabian, maybe you can share. Thank you. Exactly. So I would like to introduce a little bit more to system mapping. So Fabian just introduced system thinking. And we think that system mapping is one of the most important tools to actually apply system thinking. And as we see it, it's actually a language that allows us to talk about complexity. So if we look at the next slide, this is kind of a little bit our definition and our understanding of system mapping. So it's a visual language to understand and to talk about complex systems. So if you look at the example on the right, it's a system map that we developed in a project, and that allows you to have like this bird's eye perspective on having the different factors, seeing what are the relationships, and also kind of deriving a little bit what are the dynamics between those different parts. And so the benefits are threefold. So we want to structure and visualize relationships, of course, first of all. Second, we want to understand what happened in the past and why did it happen. So we're able to talk about it, and in the end also to tell the stories, the narratives within the system. And finally, we also want to use it as a starting point for action and trying to look at the system. Okay, where could we tweak something? Where are untapped potentials for positive change in the future? And when we look at the next slide, still loading for me. Thanks. Exactly. So when we say it's a language for complexity, we can actually compare it a little bit to our language and see what are the differences in the semantics and the syntax. And the first thing that we have within the system mapping are variables, and they kind of correspond to our nouns in the language, or like to the subjects and to the objects. And these are basically the forces and drivers that we see at play within the system. So on the right-hand side, if we imagine the case of an epidemic, we would here, for example, have those 4 drivers: infected people, infections, people exposed to the virus, and susceptible people, where we know, okay, they kind of play a role within the system. And on the next slide, when we're trying to understand how are they connected, this brings us to the kind of second concept that we're using, which are the relationships. And so here we want to show the causal connections, the actions and interplay between the different variables. And this we can kind of compare to the verbs a little bit of our language. So how do the different nouns actually interact with each other? And so if we look at the example, so we could say we have infected people. Why do we have infected people? Because there are infections. And infections are coming from people getting exposed to the virus. And people exposed to the virus depends on the number of susceptible people that we have. And susceptible people we have more of, the larger the population. So there we kind of try to show what are the connections between those variables. And finally, when we continue building those connections, we get to the feedback loops, the kind of third main concept of system mapping. And these are kind of the plot lines. These are almost like smaller narratives in between the big system narrative. And they're describing circular causal chains within the system. And so when we look here at this example, so we would have 2 loops actually. So the one on the right is the more infections we have, the more infected people. The more infected people, they get in contact eventually with others. So the more people are exposed to the virus and the more infections we have. So you're already here, it's like this self-enforcing, reinforcing loop within the system. And actually such a loop is, if it's handling alone with any other influences, this can lead to this exponential growth that we also seen in the beginning of the COVID time. But there's also a second kind of loop. It's actually a balancing loop, a limiting loop, which we see here on the outside. So when we say we have more infected people, and assuming we have a constant population, then we have actually less susceptible people that still can get infected. So we have less people exposed to the virus, we would have less infections, and therefore also less infected people. So this would kind of limit a little bit the number of infections. Obviously, this is also assumes that there is an immunity that you get after the infection. And so when we put these concepts together, we can kind of analyze a little bit, okay, what are these variables, what are the relationships, what are the dynamics within the system? It's mostly not just 1, 2, or 3 loops. As you can see here, it's actually an interplay, a very dynamic interplay of various feedback loops that we have in the system. And here you see that the system map is still kind of a pre-final version that we developed for the question of sustainable production in Peru. And you see here kind of the different areas, almost like the different pieces of a puzzle that we're trying to combine here to get this more bird's eye perspective. And now to focus a little bit more, how do we get there? So how can we actually develop such a map, and how can it help in a shared understanding? I want to talk a little bit more about this process. So how do we get from framing the project, from framing the question to actually the system map, and eventually also identifying leverage points within it? So what we developed is kind of this 5-step process. It's based on our project experience, on my experience with system modeling, on Fabian's experience with design thinking. And we tried to kind of organize this process in a step-by-step guideline. Obviously, it's not always so linear as it looks like here. It's very iterative, but this should help to kind of process through each of these steps. And so we have, especially in the beginning, kind of collecting the input. So framing the question, what do we want to find out, and then starting to explore what's actually within the system. Obviously starting to map, so kind of seeing how are the different parts connected. We want to reflect, which also includes the analysis of the map and making it more robust. And in the end, finding leverage. So what are the points in the system where we could tweak it for more positive change? And to make it this a little bit more practical and hands-on, I would like to show you the process a little bit more with the projects that we worked on with UNDP Peru, that Fabian already introduced briefly in the beginning. So quick overview of what we worked on here. The main challenge was we were asking what are the patterns that are driving regional deforestation in the Peruvian Amazon, and how can we, in this case also, how can UNDP support a more productive and sustainable landscape within the area? And for this project, we used a system mapping approach combined with a multi-stakeholder approach, and also conducted qualitative as well as user research. And the time frame for the project was around 3 months. As I said, we're actually still in the last steps, in the last process steps of this project. But still, I would like to show a little bit of the process and the insights we gained here. So first of all, it was very important to know what do we actually want to achieve with this system mapping. So we organized a project kickoff with the internal UNDP team to align, first of all, on the research question. So what do we want to find out? And also, what do you want to achieve with the project? And it was, as you can see here on the right, on the top, there were various things. It was mainly 3 things that we identified. So we wanted to have, of course, this system map for a better understanding of the different factors within the system. We wanted to do this in a multi-stakeholder approach, so kind of engaging the stakeholders, tapping into their expertise, into their experience. And finally, we also wanted to identify, okay, what are potential leverage points? What could be points where UNDP could adjust or even develop new activities to improve the sustainability and to reduce deforestation within the area. And we then continued, 1 second, Fabian. And we also in the kickoff project, the kickoff workshop talked about the different themes. So we kind of identified, okay, these are topics we want to talk about, we want to start exploring, but we also identified, okay, there are other topics, we know they play a role, but let's keep them in the back of our head, and let's maybe first focus on these themes. And this is an easy reason, because if we just put everything all at once, the system map and the whole process becomes quickly as complex as reality, and then it's not really a help for us. So it's kind of iteratively trying to start, okay, these are the themes that we want to look at. For example, agricultural production, finance and market, we decided, land governance, like these were kind of the core themes. We also identified others that we wanted to keep in mind, but just like slowly add to the discussion and to the system. And
sorry,
finally,
Jan, sorry to interrupt, just a very quick question, if we can address from Christina, suggesting if when we refer to themes, we're also referring to scope. And please, exactly, Christina, do jump in if you want to say something else about this. Thank you for your question. And thank you, Gian.
Yeah, I think it's quite an important one, because it's one that I know I get asked quite often when we talk about this, because the first thing that people do is like, oh my God, head exploding, because, you know, system is massive. So how do we determine the scope? So I'm guessing that's what you mean by themes. But just to ask on that, if a team hasn't been working with a more systems approach, and maybe that sort of wider view is not yet there, then does that mean that the themes or scope they're identifying is limited? So just, yeah, I'm just kind of curious, how do we bring in a more, that nuance that you've described so far, or those other links that maybe we haven't been working with, if you don't know what you don't know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it definitely relates to the scope, but it's not a fixed scope. It's not a fixed boundary that we're drawing here. It's more like a starting point that we kind of say, okay, these are themes that we would like to explore a little bit more. But as soon as you're talking about the relationships, about the problems, about talking with stakeholders in the next process steps that I will show in a second, you will quickly realize if there's something you're missing, or if there's another theme that you haven't thought of. And so you're kind of then adding to it a little bit layer by layer and going iteratively through the process. All right, thanks. I hope that answered the question, Christina. Exactly. Then looking at the next step. So what happened after framing the project? We started to explore it. And this means we kind of conducted first desk research, looking into studies, to trying to identify a little bit what are some drivers and some key dynamics that we're seeing in the system. And so based on this research, we then also organized another internal workshop with the UNDP team, to then again talk about like the themes and trying to decide on 4 core themes that we would be using to also again structure a little bit the discussion and also structure a little bit the system mapping process. And finally, we also talked about what are some of the open questions also from the UNDP team that we would like to explore together with the stakeholders? What are maybe uncertainties? What are things that we are also interested in to learn from the coming stakeholder workshop? And so with this information, and then coming to the third step, we were then kind of at the peak of the work, organizing a 3-day workshop with around 35 participants. And it was also really a wonderful location. We were in Pucallpa, I think it was like 2 months ago by now. Again, able to meet after the long COVID pause, and yeah, right at the border to the rainforest, and was really inspiring group of stakeholders together with indigenous people, with small farmers, with larger farmers, NGO representatives, and also representatives from the government. And this really helped us to kind of bring in the different expertise of the system. So we really wanted to include those various stakeholder groups. And within the workshop, we started first to introduce a little bit, of course, the methodology. We introduced kind of the core themes as a starting point, and then with all the participants, but also in small groups, continued talking about those topics. So we were, for example, with agricultural production, we were kind of exploring again. So what do you think are the main variables here, and kind of collecting them all together on the wall, and then kind of seeing what are some variables that come out a lot. What are some other variables that we haven't identified earlier, and then kind of slowly starting to connect those variables and kind of see, okay, how does the big picture look like, and how do those variables actually contribute to the current agricultural expansion that we're seeing.
There's a question, Maria.
Yeah. Thank you, Fabian. Yes, there's a question, and I think it might be a good timing to address before we continue with the reflect and leverage phases from Ashwin. So the identification of research questions, project goals, and themes could differ if stakeholders were brought into the process earlier. So I'm wondering, Gian, if you have any reflections on that to share. And thank you, Ashwin, for your question. Please feel free to open the mic if you want to comment something else about it.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwin. That is really a great question, because yeah, depending on the question you ask, determines whom you invite, which stakeholders, and depending on which stakeholders you invite, might change or even define the question. I mean, there we also assume a little bit of experience from UNDP. In Peru, it was also like an evaluation, a monitoring phase of the project. So we already kind of had the question and the general topic in line. Of course, we weren't too fixed on it. So within the workshop, it was also kind of listening to the stakeholders. What are other topics, especially that we would like to explore? And there was actually also one topic of illegal activities, which the UNDP team said that in the past they haven't explored it enough, but it's kind of still coming up as an issue. And this, for example, was then also one new topic that we tried to explore, tried to map out within the stakeholder process. But again, this was kind of, we run it through now kind of one time, this process, but it's also iterative. And if you kind of realize, okay, we're asking a little bit of the wrong question, it's also possible to adjust it. And I would suggest, if you're unsure about the question, or if there's maybe different opinions about it, in the explore phase, to talk also already more with the stakeholders, and maybe also to interview them, and maybe also asking them, what do you think is the problem, is the issue currently within the system that we're talking about?
Just had a sort of a good, thanks, Gian, that was really helpful. Just had sort of a really quick follow-up question. Maybe you can even come to this later if that's planned in the presentation. On the issue of, say, like conflicting perspectives, you know, do you find sometimes that some stakeholders will define a system quite differently from the way another stakeholder is defining it? And then how do you sort of, you know, find that middle ground? I guess that's maybe where facilitation comes in, but again, maybe you'll come to that later on. And I don't want to sort of interrupt the flow of your presentation. Thanks.
No, happy to answer it. Honestly, it's relatively pragmatic, our approach, I would say. I mean, the example with the elephant is a nice example. Of course, if you have kind of your own part within the system, then this is kind of at what you're looking at. Like a farmer looks at the system differently than a member of an indigenous community. But this is then also what kind of we're trying to do. We kind of ask an open question that kind of includes both of them. And then through the discussion kind of, and also through the system map in the end, kind of seeing how do those different kind of bounded worlds of the stakeholders eventually also overlap and combine to each other. Exactly, and that's also a great way back then to the slide, and this is exactly what we did. So we worked in kind of these working groups with stakeholders, 4 different groups, and in the end we then kind of looked at together, like how do those 4 core themes that we had, agricultural production, finance and market, land governance, and illegal activities, how do they actually connect to each other? How do they reinforce each other partly as well? And how in their kind of totality contribute to the deforestation that we're seeing in the system? So this was kind of the result of the workshop. And afterwards, kind of after reflecting, after also collecting the results, digitalizing the results, we had another internal workshop together with the UNDP team, which was mainly about kind of reflecting on the insights that we gained from the stakeholders, maybe again pointing out interesting statements, interesting facts, and again also looking at the system map. So on the one hand, kind of cleaning it up a little bit, but on the other hand, of course, also validating a little bit our assumptions, and maybe also identifying where are still open questions that we would need to dive in a little bit more, or maybe even remember them for further research later on. And this is how we came up then kind of with the final map, although we also, of course, have to say, you will never have the perfect map. It will never represent reality perfectly. It's always filled with assumptions, but at least it's kind of a starting point to then think about what happens if we do this and this and this, and it helps a little bit more to inform a more systemic theory of change, and then also kind of observe the system and learn a little bit more about the assumptions. Do they hold? Does something else happen? Are other factors coming in? And the system map allows you to incorporate those learnings a little bit easier and more structured. And so in the last phase, in the leverage phase, it was mainly about finalizing the map. So we also then build a digital version with Kumu. We're actually still finalizing it, where we can identify, okay, what are the main drivers? What are the main loops? What are the narratives that we're seeing in the system? So how do different parts of the system actually interact, and how do they contribute to this growing deforestation within the region? And we also started to look a little bit at leverage opportunities. So looking at certain loops, looking at certain drivers, and thinking, okay, how could we change this behavior within the system, and what could be a potential future impact if we are able to change this? And this can then become a starting point for ideation, for design of new interventions, and to exactly maybe also the formulation of a more systemic TOC. And so just briefly about the results, what we gained from this project. First of all, it was really important to giving a voice to those different stakeholders, especially also to the indigenous communities, and seeing a little bit more the connections between the sectors, so that not everyone is just looking at their part, but developing this more bird's eye perspective. In the end, it also helped a little bit more to develop a shared understanding of the problem, of the dynamics that we're seeing currently at play for deforestation, and to also for each stakeholder to see a little bit their own role within the system. It helped to gain some insights into potential leverage points and potential paths to transform the system. And finally, as I also said, it also helped to identify some other parts of the system that were maybe just on the boundary of our exploration, that would be great to research a little bit further and to understand a little bit better. For example, migrant settlers was in the end like one of the drivers we identified, but we didn't have any migrant settlers within the stakeholder group. So this would be great to extend a little bit and to deepen the knowledge in the future as well. All right, so this is a small overview, is a small insight into the project, into our work with UNDP Peru. We have planned some time for questions. We already covered two throughout the presentation. So I think we're a little bit over time, Fabian, right?
Yes, actually, maybe one question. There's already also one in the chat, which is about which stakeholder groups participated in the workshop, actually.
Yeah. Thanks, Farzana, for the question. So it was mainly small farmers. It was a representative of larger farmer organizations. It were indigenous to also stress more about. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, this is an example of or like an excerpt of the system map from Peru. So here we also see the main variable of the agricultural expansion, and some of the variables, some of the relationships, and also some of the loops that we identified play one role within the system. And I just briefly want to highlight those three loops that we're seeing. Agricultural expansion is happening because there is, on the left, you see the need to increase income. So agriculture is the main income source within the region. So there's a need to increase income. So smaller farmers, but also larger farmers, increase then their agricultural land. So there's more agricultural land in use that you see in the middle. In the bottom, then we have a higher production output, also something that you pointed out. Then eventually there's more profits from the commodity sector, which would increase the average household income, which would then reduce the need to increase income and the need for further expansion. So for small farmers, this kind of could be the logic, and it could be okay, kind of to have the agricultural land, to then produce the commodities and to have an income that kind of satisfy their needs. But there are also side effects, and actually side effects that kind of worsening this balancing loop and reinforcing this expansive behavior. And one is also on the very right side, you see it, one that you mentioned, the loss of forest cover, and also therefore the weakening of ecosystem services, which with some delay also then might have a negative impact on productivity of the farmland. So they reduce the production output, the profits, the income, and so on, and therefore create a new reason for expansion. And another interesting thing that we also heard within the workshop was also when small farmers observe this agricultural expansion by others, by other small farmers, by other migrant farmers, but also by other larger corporations. And then they ask themselves, okay, if they do it, why can't we? Why shouldn't we be allowed to expand and deforest? And so this is also what we're kind of showing here with this R4 loop, that the more agricultural expansion we have, the more we have also a culture within the area for expansion and deforestation, which then again is a reason, and this time more like a moral reason for agricultural expansion. But this is obviously just a very small excerpt and some examples that you kind of see is part of this larger map, of this larger perspective on what are the different drivers of deforestation. And before I give to Fabian to talk about now more about the transfer and how you could use system mapping in your work, I just want to briefly go back to the questions that we have in the chat.
Sorry, I would, there are plenty of them, so I think it's 4 or 5 questions. So maybe we just put them in the end, then we can, whoever wants to stay and to answer the questions, be there. So we would have, yeah, basically now 5 minutes transfer and then going back to the questions. I think that ensures that we make the most out of it.
Yeah, sure. Looking at the time, yeah, I'm sorry. I hope that's okay for everyone. In the worst case, exactly like at the end of the session, or we will get back to you with the answers to your questions.
All right, then I will take it from there. Thank you, Gian, for leading us through this super short exercise. As Felipe also said before, so of course this was really brief, and so the training, the project with Peru basically lasted around 3 months. There were plenty of workshops which were from 1 to 3 days. So of course each of this element you put in there would have been discussed with the other stakeholders, and it's basically an exchange process of agreeing, I see this, you see this, I see this connection, do you also see this connection? So there's a lot of conversation, of course, also going on throughout the process. So this was really just a glimpse of get an idea of how this type of thinking, this bird perspective, works for you. So now the question we wanted to ask also for you to answer for you today is basically how to make System Mac really actionable for you. And so we identified 3 kind of possibilities, and also basically put them into basic, intermediate, and advanced, so depending on what you are looking for. So in the first place, of course, the system mapping exercise can also be super easy just for you as an individual to think about a project, to prepare a meeting or a strategy just by your own. So it's really just starting, okay, what are the elements, what are the connections? So this is already system thinking. So it doesn't have to be digital, and it doesn't have to be huge. It's just also in a smaller way possible. So basically, the basic thing is foster your own understanding, and also, getting an idea of the circumstances which surround you, but also maybe including your team. And therefore, like you just experienced on this Miro tool, so this is for free, and we developed a toolkit which is leading you from the beginning to the end of the process on this Miro software. And the toolkit, as well as Miro, is for free usable if you just register there. And this we will also provide to you afterwards together with the presentation and the slides. So basically, this is a kind of should enable you to get started. And the toolkit is quite elaborated, so you can just go and map, but you also can really start by framing and digging deeper into the background information. So we try to put it easy access, but also kind of in-depth support for you here. So that's kind of a possibility how to get started besides just a pen and paper mapping. Then on the more intermediate side, of course, it's about always a lot about this work is aligning with teams and with donors and other stakeholders. And therefore, we provide trainings also additionally to the toolkit. So we are happy that we have the possibility to make a training with a small cohort of 6 to 15 people in September. So if you are interested now in digging deeper into system mapping and learning this also with the toolkit and how to digitally collaborate with others on this topic, it would be great to see you there. So it's in September, and it's 3 dates basically, where we have always 4 hours combined. The training is then about 12 hours long, so much more than today, of course. To really get into depth, what can you do, how do you approach this when you have stakeholders, and there we also work in smaller teams. So if you are interested, therefore just contact Maria and to save your spot there. We also will send you in the presentation then also a bit more, this is a bit more detail what we're doing. So it will also be about in-depth system thinking introduction, but you see that there are a lot of exercises. We work on a challenge together, which is also suited to your context and lead you through these 3 sessions across the 3 with each 4 hours. So this is a kind of an offering we can make for you to get a bit deeper into the topic. And then, of course, in the end, also, if it's really about bringing stakeholders together, like 40 people in a room mapping jointly with them, we are also happy to support, like we have in the Peru context. So there we also kind of available for projects to support you if it's getting into a bigger group mapping, and also involving a lot of different people there. So therefore, we are happy to support. And I just look at the time. We're just right in time. That's great. So basically, this is what we wanted to show to you in this masterclass today. So coming from the system thinking, the bigger picture, to system mapping, the process, the case study, small exercises. And we hope to got you excited about this method. We know it's kind of to get into this complexity in 1.5 hours is of course also an interesting undertaking we're doing here, but we are hoping that yeah, you really got curious about the topic, and we think that system mapping is really valuable, especially in the contexts you are working. And so, yeah, we would be happy to see you at one of the trainings using the toolkit, and we're more than happy also to answer your questions later on if you have any and want to get started with a project or something like this. So, yeah. Thank you again, Maria, also for having the opportunity to share this method in this round. And yeah, with that, for the people who are wanting to or need to leave now, we have a couple of words from Maria still left for the continuing of the overall learning journey. But of course, thank you from our side for joining. And as said, we will stay here for a couple of minutes longer, and the people who want to have their answers, the questions answered, we are happy to give them.
Thank you very much, Fabian and Gian, and everyone for your very active participation.